sort of, we've got this single notion of freedom, and so presumably then there's going to be a single notion of having a choice about it. It's that gap filler. It might be disjunctive. It might be a mess. But we've latched on to something. And then I wonder if we could then say, okay, let accidental necessity just be not having a choice with respect to, or instead, you know, just run the argument just with choice or whatever. But I wonder if, since you want to say there is such a single thing as freedom, and that's really the conclusion of the argument, that you're not free, if that then kind of puts pressure on you to actually, I think there really is a single argument here. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure. Try it again.
Okay, so I'll try it maybe more briefly, and then. But you know, at one point in the paper, you said there's no single notion of even having a choice about, and that was one of your examples.
Right, one of those many phrases which are very similar and which can be analyzed in a number of different ways.
And so what I'm saying is, if we step back and think about the big picture, what's the argument really about? Is it really about accidental necessity? Is it really about having a choice sub 4 or whatever? No, it's really about freedom. And if you think there really is such a thing as free action, then maybe we could say this: there are some actions that aren't free, and then a subset of those are the free ones. Well, they're free in virtue of something. Let whatever that something is, let's baptize it, not warrant. That's the kind of strategy with Alvin knowledge. Let's baptize it having a choice about. And then we focus on that. And then I think, you know, and we know we've got the right one, because if we turn up that we don't have a choice about it, then it won't be free, and so that's what the argument wants to get. And then I wonder if we could think of, we could either drop all talk of accidental necessity and instead talk about having a choice about, or we don't have a choice about, so the argument would say what God believed in the past, and then we could question whether it's, you know, closed under entailment and so on. Or if we wanted to, we could define accidental necessity as, you know, it's accidentally necessary for me at T if I at T have no choice about it, or whatever. But I wonder if you want this, since you think there's this univocal notion of freedom, I think you can kind of latch onto that and ladder up to a univocal notion of what's doing the work in the argument. Why? Because the argument's really about freedom. It's not about accidental necessity.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure precisely what's the best way to respond to the point. I mean, having no choice about seems to me, I mean, you could, I suppose, if you want to, say that we somehow connect this directly with freedom, which is what the argument is about, which I take it is what you're suggesting, right?
I'm saying, I'm saying if someone like you who does believe in freedom and does believe there are some actions that are free and some that aren't, now let's just baptize whatever quantity it is, as it were, that makes an action free, having a choice about it, and then let's rely on that in the argument.
Yeah.
And then that'll do everything the argument's supposed to do. It's going to get you the result if the argument were sound that you're not free. And if it didn't get you that result, then the argument would fail. It wouldn't be the argument. It's about freedom.
Yeah. I'd have to look at the premises of an argument set forth in that way. I mean, it's not clear to me that we'd have immediate reactions to what those premises, whether those premises are true or not. If the entire thing is presented in some unanalyzed or undefined notion of have no choice about, I think there might be some of those premises where we'd want to say, well, I'm not quite sure what to say.
I was not saying the argument would be sound. I was saying then there would be a specific argument.
Okay, I think maybe we should move on and continue that discussion after. Robin?
Actually, I think my point relates to Trenton's point here. And my problem here is that I think this way of analyzing accidental necessity ends up leaving the notion of freedom and the notion of power over, you'll need it as a primitive concept, unanalyzed. And the reason is that what would it mean for you to be free? Well, it means that there's nothing that's accidentally necessary in the past that determines your action, such that if it occurred, you couldn't have done otherwise. So your notion of freedom is going to depend on accidental necessity. On the other hand, your notion of accidental necessity gets analyzed in terms of having power over. And so what's really playing the role, doing all the work here, is this notion of having the power over. So you can't give like standard libertarian analyses when somebody asks them, what do you mean by libertarian freedom? They say, oh, I mean, you could have done otherwise. Not so under your account. You just have to say that's a primitive. I just have a primitive concept of power over. But I don't have that primitive concept, so I don't know what you're talking about anymore. That's my objection.
Yeah. Of course, what I was using was a bunch of different, I mean, primarily a bunch of different accounts of accidental necessity that people have offered. And many of these do sort of take it for granted, this notion of having power over something, and use that sort of as an initial place to get things going. I mean, I think the thrust of your question is a good one, and I'm not quite sure exactly how to address it or how to answer it. Namely, given what's been said here, is freedom simply some sort of unanalyzed term on this sort of approach? Or can one give a meaningful or helpful sort of analysis of it? It's surely true that the real interest here has to do with the freedom of the action involved. I think that's obviously right. And I don't think I have a really good answer to that question as to whether it is ultimately a primitive or if we can give some sort of a clear and helpful analysis of it.
All right, thanks.
So I've got no problem with the sort of conceptual pluralism about accidental necessity, but I mean, if any analysis includes something that seems sort of arbitrary, right? You wouldn't just say, well, that's just one more analysis. And what I'm wondering about is whether or not 8 and A9 have that kind of arbitrary. I mean, what is it about agents and the actions they perform, right? That's supposed to be essential to this. I mean, so suppose it could be the case that whether or not a particle indeterministically decays, right, has some sort of counterfactual, is the antecedent of a counterfactual about the past, right? So what is it about agents and their powers to act in different ways that justifies its being privileged in these analyses of accidental necessity?
Well, I guess it's simply one sort of interesting sort of notion in the neighborhood, right? Are there certain things which would be true no matter what? No matter what in the sense of no matter what any agent might do, okay? Are there things of that sort? Well, that's not the only notion of accidental necessity we might be interested in. Namely, is something true in such a way that it's impervious to the action of any sort of agent? But it seems to be an interesting one, and therefore one that in certain contexts might be perfectly appropriate to be pointing to or focusing on.
Okay, let's thank both our speakers.